for prayer, sino? Nandiyan na? The 67th session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 16th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Ramon Bong Revilla Jr. will lead the chamber in prayer. Senator Revilla.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We seek your presence and guidance to come and fill this hall with your love, your grace, and your wisdom, and your unending mercy as we continue to fulfill our mandates to the people. Lord, now we humbly come to you and ask you to show us your ways and guide us in truth. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Lord, I pray that you would pour your bountiful blessings in all our lives, that you would protect each one of us and every member of our families and keep us safe and our bodies always healthy. Make us ready for your divine plans and the future you have been preparing for all of us. Your word reminds us that in you we live, move, and have our being. Lord Jesus, I also ask for the spirit of joy to fill every heart here today, that we may have true unity and be of the same mind, having the same love for one another. We also bless our nation, the nation of the Philippines. You said that blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. May you always sit enthroned over our nation. May your loving hand bless every island of this nation, from the south to the north and from the east to the west. We dedicate our nation to you. Lastly, Lord, it is our prayer that all of us whom you have called to legislate please you in every way, that each one of us would act justly, with love and mercy, and walk humbly in your sight. All of this we all pray in the mighty and most precious name of Jesus. Amen.
The Secretary will now call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S., Cayetano P.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Honasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar. Senate President Trillan.
Huh? 20 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, our dear colleagues. Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 66th Session, May 5, 2014, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? The Journal of Session number 66 is approved upon motion of the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will read the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 2190, entitled an act vesting upon Congress the sole power to create barangays, amending for the purpose Section 6, 285 and 385 of Republic Act 7160, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991, and for other purposes by Senator Marcos Jr.
Committee on Local Government and Finance.
Senate number 2191, an act establishing a health education grant program related to autism spectrum disorders by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Youth Finance.
Senate number 2192, an act to promote the production, processing, marketing, and distribution of Philippine mangoes, providing funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Lapid.
Agriculture and Food, Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship Finance.
Senate number 2193, an act strengthening the Productivity Incentives Act of 1990 by Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Labor, Employment, Human Resources Development, Ways and Means.
Senate number 2194, an act amending Batas Pambansa Bill 68 or the Corporation Code of the Philippines by Senator Sani Angara.
Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 601, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported need to address the increasing number of complaints against air carriers, especially for canceled flights and delayed refunds by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Services.
PS Resolution number 602, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the World Bank report that the Philippines did not meet its rice policy objective by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Agriculture and Food.
PS Resolution number 603, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the alleged anomalous bidding conducted by officials of the National Irrigation Administration in the province of Isabela by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations.
PS Resolution number 604, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the legal system in many countries, including the Philippines, could not react fast enough to the emergence of illegal synthetic drugs in Asia by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
PS Resolution number 605, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the Food and Drug Administration report that certain food products were sold and illegally repacked without appropriate labels in the city of Valenzuela, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Trade and Commerce, Entrepreneurship.
PS Resolution number 606, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that most Filipinos had vitamin D deficiency, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
PS Resolution number 607, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the Philippines is the most dangerous place for environmental activists in Asia, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights, Public Order, Dangerous Drugs.
PS Resolution number 608, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that some local overseas employment agencies are involved in job scams, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Labor, Employment, Human Resource Development.
Senate number 609, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that unregistered eye drops are being sold in the market, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship.
PS Resolution number 610, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that some swimming floats contain toxic chemicals by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health, Demography, Trade and Commerce, Entrepreneurship.
PS Resolution number 611, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported rise of autism cases in the Philippines, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography and Youth.
PS Resolution number 612, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported drought experienced in the provinces of Kalinga, Ifugao, and Mountain Province that has damaged $500 million worth of crops, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Agriculture and Food, Climate Change.
Yes, Resolution number 613, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that lead paint used on religious sculptures pose serious health risk, by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
Yes, Resolution number 614, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the World Health Organization's recommendations in preventing vector-borne diseases, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
Yes, Resolution number 615, directing the Senate Committee on Environment and Natural Resources and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the status of Manila Bay 6 years after the Supreme Court issued the writ of continuing mandamus directing 11 executive departments and agencies to restore its waters to Class B level, by Senator Lapid.
Environment and Natural Resources.
Yes, Resolution number 616, directing the Senate Committee on Health and Demography and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the preparedness of the Philippines to face the deadly Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus, more popularly known as the MERS coronavirus, by Senator Lapid.
Health and Demography.
Yes, Resolution number 617, congratulating and commending GMA Network, Inc. for its recognition as an international awardee of the University of Georgia's 73rd Annual George Foster Peabody Awards for its coverage of the assault and aftermath of Super Typhoon Yolanda, Haiyan, by Senator Lapid.
Rules.
Yes, Resolution number 618, expressing profound sympathy and condolences to the Republic of Korea for the tragic loss of some 190 lives when South Korean vessel MV Sewol capsized on 16 April 2014 off the coast of Guanmaido Island, South Korea, by Senator Lapid.
Rules.
Yes, Resolution number 619, entitled Resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the government's alleged poor performance in the audit by the European Union, European Maritime Safety Agency, EMSA, in relation to the status of maritime industry in the Philippines, especially on the maritime safety and educational standards, by Senator Herster Estrada.
Public Services.
PS Resolution number 620, directing the Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship to conduct an investigation in aid of legislation and the impact of its low and expensive internet connection provided to consumers, which adversely affect ease of doing business in the Philippines and advancement of telecommunication services and facilities in all areas of the country, by Senator Paolo Benigno Bamakino IV.
Commerce, Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship and Public Services.
PS Resolution number 621, directing the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies to investigate in aid of legislation the devastating financial losses suffered by depositors of a closed bank, with a view to enacting legislation that would adequately protect the interests of the depositing public, by Senator Sani Angara.
Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
PS Resolution number 622, directing the Senate Committee on Energy to look into the status of implementation of our country's Power Development Program and National Energy Plan under Republic Act number 7638, otherwise known as the Department of Energy Act of 1992, in relation to other existing laws, and to convene the Joint Congressional Power Commission for the purpose of reporting to the Filipino people about the overall state of the energy infrastructure system of the Philippines and for other purposes, by Senator Marcos Jr.
Energy.
PS Resolution number 623, directing the Senate Committee on National Defense and Security to inquire and look into, in aid of legislation, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, recently signed by the Philippines and the United States of America, to clarify the contents and coverage thereof, and to examine the extent of the strategic military relationship between the U.S. and RP under the said agreement, by Senator Trillanes IV.
National Defense and Security, Foreign Relations.
Letter from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas submitting to the Senate the 2013 BSP Annual Report pursuant to Section 40, Chapter 1, Article 5 of the New Central Bank Act, and the Report on Economic and Financial Developments in the Philippines, 4th Quarter 2013, Chapter 1, Article 5 of the New Central Bank Act.
Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
Nandito na yung committee report. Additional reference of business.
Sunday.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 2195 entitled Creating the Aklan Airport Authority and for Other Purposes by Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Government corporations, public enterprises, public services, and finance.
Senate number 2196, an act fixing the rates of interest upon loans and forbearances by amending certain sections of Act number 2655 as amended, introduced by Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Banks, financial institutions, and carriages.
Senate number 2197, an act expanding the prohibited acts of discrimination against women on account of sex, amending for the purpose Articles 135 and 137 of PD 442 as amended, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines, by Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Labor, employment, human resources development, women, family relations, and gender equality.
Senate number 2198, an act addressing the system of prostitution, imposing penalties on its perpetrators, providing protective measures and support services for its victims, and decriminalizing vagrancy, repealing for the purpose Articles 202 and 341 of the revised Penal Code, and amending RA 9208 for the purposes by Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Human justice and human rights, women, family relations, gender equality, and finance.
Senate number 2199, an act defining the vision and policies of government in the housing and urban development sector, creating the Department of Housing and Urban Development, defining its mandate, powers, and functions, and for other purposes by Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Urban planning, housing, resettlement, civil service and government organization, and finance.
Senate number 2200, an act providing for the sustainable management of forest resources and for other purposes by Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Committees on Environment and Natural Resources, Local Government, Ways and Means, and Finance.
Senate number 2201, an act providing for the articles of military justice in the Armed Forces of the Philippines, repealing for that purpose Commonwealth Act numbered 408, otherwise known as the Articles of War as amended, other special laws, and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Ejercito Estrada.
National Defense and Security, Finance.
Committee report number 22 submitted jointly by the Committees on Government, Corporations, and Public Enterprises and Public Services on Senate number 1831, introduced by Senators Recto, Cynthia A. Villar, and Escudero, entitled an act extending the corporate life of the Philippine National Railways for another 50 years, further amending for this purpose Republic Act number 4156, entitled an act creating the Philippine National Railways, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, and providing for necessary funds for its operations as amended, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsored Senator Cynthia Villar and Recto.
Calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Sir President,
Majority Leader.
it's my honor to welcome to the Senate a delegation, our guest from Australia, Miss Georgia Goldsworthy, the delegation leader, Mr. Matt Ellis, Australian Labor Party, Miss Clarabella Burley, Australian Labor Party, Mr. Evan Mulholland, Liberal Party of Australia, Mr. Lanchlan McNaughton, Liberal Party of Australia, Mr. Chris Duffy, the Nationals, and Miss Lauren Barons of the Council Representative. May we welcome them to the Senate, Mr.
We
President.
welcome the Australian delegation led by Miss Georgia Goldsworthy, the delegation leader, to the Senate and make the presence of our guest from Australia part of the record of the Senate for today's session.
Mr. President, we also have students from Central Luzon State University, Department of Political Science and Philippine History, Science from the city of Muñoz, Nueva Ecija, led by Professors Floresca, Manahan, Parico, and Reyes. May we ask them to rise to be recognized also?
We recognize the students from the Central Luzon State University, the Science City of Muñoz, Nueva Ecija. They are students of political science and Philippine history, led by Professor Floresca, Professor Manangan, Professor Parico, and Professor Reyes. We welcome them to the Senate and make their presence part of the record for today's session. Thank you very much.
Mr.
Welcome
President,
to the Senate.
before I move that we recognize Senator Legarda, I ask that we acknowledge the presence of National Museum Director Jeremy Barnes, National Museum Assistant Director Ana Labrador, Ms. Mita Rufino, Cholo Hidalgo Laurel, and Direct Brillante Mendoza, who are also here today.
We recognize the presence of Director Jeremy Barnes and the rest of the officials of the National Museum.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the resilient Senator, Senator Lauren Legarda, to deliver a privilege speech.
For the privilege hour, with the permission of the chamber, we suspend for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is National Heritage Month.
We have not yet resumed the session.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Session is resumed.
Thank you. Since May has been declared National Heritage Month, Mr. President, I wish to deliver this brief privilege speech to give importance to our heritage, art, and culture. In November last year, we warmly received the news that the Philippines has won a seat in the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. It was certainly great news, especially after the unfortunate earthquake that damaged several of our heritage churches in Bohol. This successful election could have been triggered by several achievements in the country's heritage conservation programs, among many factors. A year before that, in 2012, we saw the removal of the rice terraces of the Cordilleras from the UNESCO list of World Heritage in danger, following serious efforts to preserve and manage the once threatened treasure. It was also in that year when the Tubataha Reefs Natural Park Act was recognized by the World Future Council as a model policy for marine conservation, while the historic city of Vigan was awarded the best practice for World Heritage Site Management by UNESCO. These recognitions prove that we can successfully preserve our heritage and that our efforts can become models for other nations to follow. But I also wish to highlight the fact that for a nation that is overflowing with both tangible and intangible masterpieces, as well as natural and man-made heritage, we still have to work harder to promote and preserve these cultural wonders. The National Commission on Culture and Arts has been spearheading programs for the conservation of cultural heritage, particularly in developing cultural industries, undertaking research and documenting indigenous knowledge systems, agricultural practices and customary laws, supporting the enrichment of festivals in the country. The NCCA's Philippine Arts Festival displays the brilliance of Filipinos in architecture, in cinema, dance, literature, music, theater, and the visual arts, while the Dayao Indigenous Peoples Festival gathers the ethno-linguistic groups all over the country to celebrate their culture and way of life. It has also established a program called the Schools of Living Traditions, where the young learn about arts and crafts, music, oral traditions, and other indigenous practices. It has also opened the NCCA Gallery for contemporary Filipino artists to exhibit their works. The NCCA has also used the internet as a tool for promotion of Philippine culture. It has come up with a music video and an interactive game to promote Sagisag Kultura ng Filipinas, a registry of the country's cultural icons, including notable Philippine individuals, items of heritage, remarkable products of Philippine imagination and intelligence, historical sites, native flora and fauna, inventions, and important researches by Filipinos. As a primary agency of the Philippine government charged with the responsibility to preserve, develop, and promote Philippine arts and culture, the NCCA creates diverse opportunities to celebrate our heritage and the artistic excellence and creativity of the 7 arts. Admittedly, we need to do more, and Congress has a big role in the promotion and the preservation of our culture, which is unifying, humanizing, and a modernizing agent of our society. As we celebrate National Heritage Month this May, I would like to reiterate the need to establish a Department of Culture. And those who have helped me craft this important measure are here in this hall today, namely the Director and the Assistant Director of the National Museum, Director Barnes and Dr. Labrador. They have helped us conceptualize a centralized body that will develop, manage, and be responsible for the implementation of policy, legislation, and strategic direction for the identification, protection, preservation, conservation, regulation, and promotion of culture, as well as to foster, strengthen, and accelerate the convergence of various cultural offices and agencies and rationalize their organizations and functions. The proposed department will be composed of the Office of the Secretary, which will be headed by a person recognized as an accomplished culture or cultural heritage manager or advocate, or a distinguished scholar or practitioner in the fields of arts, anthropology, history, cultural diplomacy, and other fields of endeavor related to culture or cultural heritage. 5 bureaus will be established within the department to focus on core areas of protection and regulation, management and development, information, education and training, cultural institutions, industries, and practitioners. And the Rizal Centers, or Centro Rizal, envisioned by Congress to be the Philippine counterpart to cultural networks of other nations. For a country so rich in cultural heritage, and where culture and arts are so important in the enrichment of the Filipino identity, we must have a Department of Culture to ensure that our heritage, or pamana, which defines our being Filipinos, must be rightfully passed on to the succeeding generations. Mr. President, amid the screaming headlines of burning political issues which define boundaries that divide us, we must be reminded of that common identity that ultimately unites us. It is this great national pride of being Filipinos, as bearers of a rich cultural patrimony. It is our cultural heritage that will help us move forward as one people. Mabuhay ang kalinangang Pilipino. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Kalinangan ba tama?
Culture.
Sir President, as we thank Senator Legarda for that speech, I move that we refer the speech to the Committee on Education, Culture, and Arts.
So referred.
Sir President, before I ask permission from the body to consider Senate Resolution number 376, I ask that we recognize and acknowledge the presence of the following: Mr. Anacleto Sobrepeña, Chito Sobrepeña, President of the Metrobank Foundation; Mr. Nicanor Torres, Executive Director; Ms. Irene Labitad, the Senior Program Manager; Mr. Francis Respicio, Head Corporate Communications Unit; Mr. Lian Carlo Luis Ipac, the Senior Program Staff Education Unit of the Education Unit; Ms. Eileen Ballesteros, she's the Head of the Corporate Communications; and Ms. Kathleen Lanusa, Officer Corporate Communications; and lastly, Dr. Catherine Vistroyu, the President of the Towns Foundation. They are here with us today, Mr. President.
The presence of Mr. Chito Sobrepeñas and the rest of his staff is placed of record. Welcome to the Senate.
With the permission of the body, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution 376, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution 386.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of proposed Senate Resolution 376 is in order.
Sir President, we ask that the Senate Secretary to read the title and the text of Senate Resolution number 376.
Secretary is directed to do so.
Yes, Resolution number 376, introduced by Senator Manuel Lito M. Lapid. Resolution congratulating and commending the 2013 awardees of the Outstanding Women in the Nation's Service Towns conferred by the Metrobank Foundation, Inc. and Metrobank Card Corporation. Whereas the Outstanding Women in the Nation's Services Towns search is undertaken by the Metrobank Foundation, Inc. and Metrobank Card Corporation to recognize exceptional women aged 21 to 45 years old whose selfless contribution to society helped shape our country's future and promoted economic, social, and cultural development. Whereas the award is given once every 3 years, and it has been bestowed on 149 exemplary women since the inception of the town search in 1974. Whereas the 2013 Towns awardees were selected from 51 nominees who went through a rigorous screening process, after which selected finalists move on for final judging and were interviewed by the final board of judges headed by Chief Justice Maria Lourdes P.A. Sereno and composed of members Dr. William Padulina, renowned biologist, chairman of the board of Euromed Laboratories Philippines, Inc., and former Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology, Dr. Esperanza Cabral, former Secretary of the Department of Health and the Department of Social Welfare and Development, Lilia de Lima, PESA Director General and Chairman of the Board, and Nestor Hardin, President of the Sina Malaya Foundation, Inc., and former President of the Cultural Center of the Philippines. Whereas the 2013 awardees for towns are Christine Karen Davila for her contribution to the media sector, Maria Rachel Herodias for her contribution to the performing arts, Maria Mihan Ramulete for her contribution to the theater arts, Noraida Karim for her contribution in the sphere of social work, Eleanor Pinugo for her contribution to the field of social entrepreneurship and education, Annie Karina De Leon Brown for her contribution to sports, Gemma Nerisma for her contribution to the field of atmospheric science, Maricor Soriano for her contribution to the field of applied physics, and attorney Darlene Berberabe for her contribution in the sphere of government service. Whereas this year's winners will join the ranks of remarkable women honored by the Foundation over the last 39 years and will automatically become members of Towns Foundation, Inc., which is a national organization of dynamic and effective women who, by their common shared activities, help transform the lives of Filipinos. Whereas the Senate of the Philippines proudly joins the Metrobank Foundation, Inc. and Metrobank Card Corporation in congratulating and commending the women who have served as pillars for continuing excellence for and made deep impacts in the respective spheres of influence through the 2013 The Outstanding Women in Nation Service Award. Resolved as it is hereby resolved that the Senate of the Philippines congratulates and commends the 2013 awardees of the Outstanding Women in the Nation Service, Towns, conferred by the Metrobank Foundation, Inc. and Metrobank Card Corporation. 1. Christine Karen Davila for Media. 2. Maria Rachel Herodias for Performing Arts. 3. Maria Mihan Ramulete for Theater Arts. 4. Noraida Karim for Social Work. 5. Eleanor Pinugo for Social Entrepreneurship and Education. 6. Annie Karina De Leon Brown for Sports. 7. Gemma Nerisma for Atmospheric Science. 8. Maricar Soriano for Applied Physics. 9. Attorney Darlene Berberabe for Government Service.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 376, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 386, subject to style, Mr. President.
Any objection? Proposed Senate Resolution number 376, taking into account proposed Senate Resolution 386, are hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that all senators present be made co-authors of the said resolution.
Any objection? Hearing none, the senators present are made co-authors of the measure.
Mr. President, I ask for a minute suspension so that we can congratulate the awardees and maybe invite them for a photo opportunity with the Senate President. I move to suspend.
Any objection? Hearing none, session is suspended.
president of the Towns Foundation.
Mabuti naman at hindi sila investigation.
Malapit na.
Ulit ba ako? Parang dapat siniro na lang.
Pasado ka pala, galing ka.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Hey, congratulations for the good job you do, huh? Congratulations.
Here, para sa isang staff.
Congratulations to all of you, huh?
Oh, God. Thank you. Maharap na lang kay Tita Lai Lawson. Yes. Thank you po. Oh, I think we should go.
May resolution na ano ulit po niya?
Huling hearing mo, township na yun, township. Gusto niya yaw. Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, I'll go. Okay na.
of cheap price and good quality, good luck, good for you. Saka sir, prerequisites sa PPP and commitment sa ASEAN, ASEAN integration, and the foreign chambers, if you remember, they're the ones that support you. You're okay for your good leader. You're okay with it. Two big boys pa lang tumatawag sa akin. But yung stay ko naman na there's no provision in it.
This is your first meal that you sponsor. No, but this is the first two. Oh, okay.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 1831 under Committee Report number 22 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 1831 under Committee Report number 22.
Any objection? Hearing none, so considered.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate Secretary read the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act extending the corporate life of the Philippine National Railways for another 50 years, further amending for this purpose Republic Act number 4156 entitled An Act Creating the Philippine National Railways, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, and providing for the necessary funds for its operations as amended.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Cynthia Villar to sponsor the said measure.
Senator Villar is recognized to sponsor Committee Report number 22, reporting out Senate Bill number 1831. Senator Villar is recognized.
Mr. President, my fellow senators, I stand here today to sponsor Senate Bill 1831 with amendments or an act extending the corporate life of the Philippine National Railways for 25 years and renewable for another 25 years. Further amending for this purpose, Republic Act number 4156, entitled An Act Creating the Philippine National Railways, prescribing its power, functions, and duties, and providing for the necessary funds for the operations as amended. First off, I would like to emphasize on the urgency of the passage of the Bill 1831, since the PNR Charter will already expire next month on June 19, 2014, to be specific. The mandate of PNR is actually covered by 3 laws. The Enabling Law, Republic Act 4156, bestowed on PNR its 50 years or corporate life that began in June 20, 1964. The mandate of the law was for PNR to provide the public service of owning and operating a national rail service and related transportation system, and it will serve as a corporation and instrumentality of the Philippine government. Republic Act 6366 amended the Enabling Law in August 1971 and, among others, reiterated the role of PNR as being a part of the national government infrastructure program. The third law, Presidential Decree 741, was amended in 1975, which, among others, reiterated that the viability of PNR operation must be ensured by the national government to enable PNR to render the rail transport services for passengers and freight at the minimum prices possible. We conducted consultation meetings and a Senate hearing on April 29, 2014 regarding this. I would like to point out that the persons or parties in attendance and concerned are in consensus that the PNR Charter should be extended. They include the officers and employees of the Philippine National Railway, as well as the representative from the Department of Transportation and Communication, Governance Commission for GOCCs, Department of Finance, Metro Manila Development Authority, local government units affected, private sector groups among the stakeholders. The OTC, to which PNR is attached to, cited the important role of PNR in delivering vital, safe, convenient, and affordable transportation services to the Filipino people. We also invited the National Economic Development Authority. They were not able to attend the hearing, but NEDA Secretary Arsenio Balisacan sent a letter outlining his department's comments and position on the proposed extension of the PNR Charter. NEDA supports the extension and deemed it necessary due to the following reasons. I would like to cite NEDA's reasons since it is the country's social and economic development planning and policy coordinating body. Among the key roles of railways is to promote economic development and inclusive growth. NEDA cites in its position paper that extending PNR's corporate life, thereby extending its mandate and continuing its recent development efforts to improve, modernize, and expand PNR's railway services, is supportive of the government thrust in improving connectivity and efficiency among urban centers and regional growth hubs in the north-south direction across the country. NEDA also pointed out that PNR is the only government instrumentality that has the mandate to provide and operate a nationwide railroad and transportation system, and that not extending PNR's corporate life or charter would still compel the government to find or create a new entity that will provide and operate railway services in the country inasmuch as DOTC, to which PNR is currently attached to, does not have the mandate to operate such. More than anything, I would like to highlight, Mr. President and esteemed colleagues, that PNR provides the cheapest mode of transportation to our people. Ang Metro Manila Commuter Line ng PNR ang nag-o-offer ng pinakamurang form of transport sa mga commuters sa halagang 71 centavos kada kilometro kumpara sa jeep na 2 piso kada kilometro o 8 piso para sa unang 4 na kilometro, which is our minimum fare, at 1 peso and 40 centavos para sa mga susunod na kilometro. Sa bus naman, ang pamasahe ay 2 piso rin kada kilometro at 10 piso para sa unang 5 kilometro and 185 pesos para sa mga susunod na kilometro. It is worth noting that PNR has not increased its fare matrix in the last 20 years, Mr. President and esteemed colleagues. Ang mas mura na lang sa pagsakay sa PNR trains ay ang pagbibisikleta at paglalakad. Kaya naman, no isang taon, halos 20 milyon na pasahero or 55,400 commuters daily ang kanilang naserbisyuhan. At ngayong taon, 2014, between 80,000 to 100,000 passengers per day ang kanilang sinerbisyuhan. According to PNR itself, permanent discontinuance of the commuter rail service in Metro Manila and of the anticipated rail service revival to Bicol will displace passengers who come from the lowest earning C and D economic bracket of our country's population. Moreover, as an archipelagic country, we require efficient and safe transport networks, both inland and on the sea. We need a seamless transport system to connect our main islands of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, plus the 7,100 more islands we have as well, as to transport passengers and goods via freight movement. Of course, a crucial component of this transportation system and requirement of the country is one of our basic modes of transport, by rail. Thus, the role of the Philippine National Railways, or PNR, in this context is crucial. The Medium-Term Development Plan 2011 to 2016 recognizes the need to address the Philippine infrastructure backlog and cites as a priority the creation of an integrated and multimodal national transport and logistics system. For road transport, working towards a more efficient transport network will mean connecting underserved rural areas with markets in expanded logistic chains. Internal logistics activity in the Philippines is considered to be relatively small compared to nearby Association of South Asian Nations, or ASEAN, and the government sees this as an opportunity to spur the growth of MSMEs, or micro, small, and medium enterprises, by linking them to global supply chains through better transportation and logistics infrastructure. Presently, PNR operates a commuter line from Tutuban to Santa Rosa, Laguna, covering 23 stations over a stretch of 50 kilometers, and from Naga to Sipocot with route length of 35 kilometers. The long-distance service to Legazpi, Bicol has been suspended in October 2012 because of damages to bridges due to typhoon. But according to PNR, they plan to resume service by September 2014 with a test run by next month. A seamlessly linked transport system, particularly railway, is important. Rail Connectivity Index is a reliable indicator or barometer of a developed economy. Route kilometers per million population is a reliable indicator of rail connectivity. Developed economies have a high rail connectivity index. How do we compare in terms of route kilometers per million population? USA 747, Japan 157, Malaysia 87, India 55, China 45, and the Philippines 5.5. Sa atin, we discovered na umikli pa ang route kilometers ng PNR. The Philippines has a total of 300,000 route kilometers. In its heyday during the 1970s, so to speak, PNR is running on 1,100 route kilometers from La Union to Legazpi. Now it is down to only 85 route kilometers from Tutuban to Santa Rosa and from Naga to Sipocot. As Senator Ralph Recto pointed out in our public hearing, the most problematic factor for doing business in the Philippines is inadequate supply of infrastructure. In a survey, 21% of respondents cited it. The other factors were corruption, 17.8%, inefficient government bureaucracy, 16.9%, and tax regulation, only 8.6%. So it is a big factor in economic competitiveness of our country. An efficient transport network is vital in particular and is part of the medium-term Philippine Development Plan 2011 to 2016, Chapter 5 of which, on accelerating infrastructure development, observes the need to have the following developed: a comprehensive long-term national transport policy which will guide the restructuring of the transport sector into a well-coordinated and integrated multimodal transport system. An integrated multimodal logistics system. As an example, the Subic-Clark-Manila-Batangas corridor is envisioned to become a seamless intermodal logistic corridor, ship-to-rail transport or rail-to-truck transport. The viability of establishing an efficient long-distance, high-speed mass rail transit system integrated with a mass transit commuter rail system in Metro Manila shall be explored. The feasibility of freight rail services for all strategic logistics corridor will also be considered. It cannot be overemphasized that railways directly contribute to economic growth, as demand for transport is directly and positively correlated to growth of gross domestic product or GDP. In developing economies, the elasticity of transport to GDP is 1.25, meaning a GDP growth of 9% would translate into increase in demand for transport to 11%. So in the Philippines, if we are increasing by about 6%, the demand for transport should be about 8.5%. How much of this growth is captured by railways, however, depends on the capacity and quality of the railway infrastructure and services. Rail services sector also provides significant employment opportunities to Filipinos. In 2010, 51.8% of the total estimated 36 million employed persons were employed in the services sector. Around 50% of the employed persons in the services sector were engaged in transportation, communication, and storage sector. This includes the rail sector workers who are mainly involved in train operations, engineering operations, and other support services. In fact, the solution of the PNR would result in the unemployment for its almost 2,000 employees. Railways promote economic development on a more balanced basis and hence promote inclusive growth. However, railways require huge investment and are usually subsidized by government. The government subsidy to PNR amounted to 653 million last year. Based from the data supplied by PNR, the subsidy granted to it is less than the subsidy granted to the Light Rail Transport Authority, or LRTA, on a per-passenger basis. Thus, last year, the government subsidy of 653 million to PNR translated to 32 pesos and 70 centavos per PNR passenger, less than the 36 and 40 centavos subsidy per LRTA passenger. The subsidy to PNR is deemed justified because, as cited earlier, it is the cheapest mode of transport for passengers, and the benefits are dispersed to a wide geographic area covered by its route. I would also like to highlight, Mr. President and esteemed colleagues, that railways are superior to other modes of mass transportation in terms of minimal impact on the environment and efficiency of land use. In congested nations with large urban populations, like here in the Philippines, the effort to match road capacity with exponential growth of vehicular traffic will always be a challenge. Railways use less land than the road sector, less polluting, and can generate high capacity at that. PNR trains will play a key role in decongesting the traffic in Metro Manila and in other areas. Just this March, in fact, PNR launched a special coach service which, according to DOTC, is part of the efforts toward easing present traffic situation in Manila, Makati, Pasay, and other affected areas, especially in the southern part of the metropolis. Instead of taking private vehicles, motorists will now have a more efficient alternative. I also appreciate the role of railway systems in bringing growth and development to our less developed areas in far-flung provinces. Regional connectivity should also be a primary goal or consideration for us. We can learn a thing or two from India, which operates one of the largest rail operations in the world. Their rail lines are run to serve the backward and less developed regions. It is undertaken based on socio-economic considerations, which are national and cultural integration, national development, and inclusive growth. With the proposed extension of the charter of the PNR, there are also issues and concerns about their finances that need to be assessed, discussed, and revised if necessary. For instance, the need for additional capitalization was brought up during the hearing, and admittedly, numerous reforms need to be implemented in the PNR in order to rehabilitate and modernize its operation. DOTC, the supervising body of PNR, is currently considering the implementation of the Integrated Luzon Railway Project, Phase 1 of which will run from Malolos, Bulacan to Calamba, Laguna. Due to the sheer size of the project, DOTC exploring the option of funding some portions of this through public-private partnership agreement and a portion, the North-South Commuter Railway, through a Japanese Official Development Assistance or ODA loans. Decision on the funding option sources is pending with the Department of Finance. In a paper submitted to the committee, the PNR commits to undertake, improve the efficiency of its existing Metro Manila commuter line and expand the line northward to Malolos, automate the present fare collection system, revive the main line south to Bicol and extend the south line onwards to Sorsogon, introduce freight service for goods via the existing at-grade PNR trucks, and improve the utilization of PNR real estate assets, implement the highest standards of governance in its financial and management operations. These reform commitments will hopefully reduce the yearly subsidy provided by the government for PNR operations. NEDA, for its part, has also communicated to the committee measures that PNR should consider to improve its operations and increase its contribution to national economic development, some of which are among the commitments cited by PNR already. The others include conduct a full-blown study for the overall PNR railway modernization plan, looking into the viability of extending the existing PNR lines to routes that are possible sources of increased ridership. Determine most advantageous or appropriate rail transit technology for PNR lines. Utilization and improved ticketing, safety, and security systems. Settle all its obligation to positively contribute to the national economy. Continue efforts in venturing into other means of increasing its revenues to help cover outstanding obligations and to better manage its operations. In fact, Mr. President and esteemed colleagues, given the scenario we have now, when we had to wait 50 long years to review and assess PNR, the committee deems it proper to renew the charter only for 25 years, renewable for another 25 years instead of 50 years. At this point, Mr. President and esteemed colleagues, given the short time frame until June 19, 2014, when the PNR Charter expires, I seek the urgent passage of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Villar. Yes, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Recto, for his sponsorship speech.
Senator Recto is recognized for a co-sponsorship speech.
Thank you, Mr. Senate President. My dear colleagues, there are only a few times when a bill must be railroaded, and this is one of those. The charter of the Philippine National Railways will expire on June 20. If its corporate life is not extended, PNR will be dissolved, its assets sold off, from the carcasses of locomotives which will be sold per kilo to its vast land holdings which will be auctioned off per square meter. As senators, we can do two things: stand on the platform and wave our last goodbye as the dissolution train leaves the station, or we can give it a new lease of life by vowing that PNR's last trip shall not happen on our watch. Mr. President, I will not use the looming deadline in calling for the railroading of this bill. I would rather dwell on PNR's glorious past, but more than that, on its great potential, because this bill should not be passed for sentimental reasons, but because it is the right thing to do. In this age of bullet trains, the lumbering PNR coaches we see today may impress us as museum pieces. From La Union to Albay, we also see the ruins of brick terminals, crumbling bridges, and tracks overgrown with weeds or overrun with houses. Others have simply disappeared, like the lines in Panay and Cebu, and the spur lines to San Jose, Nueva Ecija, Naik Cavite, Batangas City, San Quintin in eastern Pangasinan, Santa Cruz, Laguna. Routes of lateral lines like the ones from Florida Blanca to Arayat in Pampanga and from Lipa, Batangas to San Pablo, Laguna can only be traced in old maps. In Metro Manila, the 12 tranvia lines which fanned into the suburbs have long been buried in asphalt, turned into streets whose names betray their railway origins like Tramo, Pasig Line, Daang Bakal. Today, train service has shrunk to a 43-kilometer commuter line from Divisoria to Santa Rosa. But this wasn't the way it used to be. At its peak, the Philippine railway system stretched 1,140 kilometers. Before the war, one can board a train in Lucena before breakfast, switch to another train in Tutuban by lunch, and get off in Dagupan in time for dinner. And it wasn't confined to Luzon alone. In 1907, the 36-kilometer Cebu-Danao line was inaugurated. This was further extended south to Argao. 5 years later, 116 kilometers of railway were already crisscrossing Panay. But what is impressive was not the expanse of the network, but the speed by which they were built at a time when builders relied less on mechanized power and more on hordes of manual laborers and herds of carabaos. The first one, a tram line from Manila to Malabon, built by Inigo Sobel's great-grandfather, was inaugurated in 1888 after 2 years of construction. The 196-kilometer Manila-Dagupan line was completed in 5 years in 1892, with one section, the 76-kilometer Tarlac to Dagupan, completed in 6 months in the midst of the typhoon season. From groundbreaking to ribbon cutting, the 36-kilometer Cebu-Danao line was completed in 10 months. Compare this to the more than 5 years and counting struggle to connect the MRT-3 to the LRT-1 in Trinoma, or the decade-old Baclaran-Bacoor LRT extension project, comparatively short at 11 kilometers, in which not a single pylon has been driven to the ground. Ngayon, nahihirapan tayong dugtungan ang LRT-2 ng 4 na kilometro, pero umabot ito ng Masinag Antipolo. Pero alam nyo ba na 100 taon na ang nakakaraan, mayroong Marikina Line mula Manila hanggang San Mateo na may habang 31 kilometro. Na dati-rati kung Simba at Suman ang trip mo sa Antipolo, pwede kang mag-tren mula Tutuban hanggang Hinulugang Taktak. It took 3 days to lay a kilometer of track 122 years ago. Today, it takes months for one rail-related document to move from one to another. While one can argue that today's delays could be due to the engineering challenges in building in urban areas, one cannot say that the difficulty of fording more than 100 rivers from Manila to Dagupan was less exacting. Or could it be perhaps that red tape wasn't in existence then? Or that maybe 19th century contractors were not hamstrung by the procurement hassles that their 21st century counterparts have to confront? The answer is that the British builders of the Manila-Dagupan Road had to fend off bureaucratic meddling and, as their correspondences reveal, had to rely on grease money as a major construction material. While there is no debate that the PNR is a shadow of its former self, there is also no doubt that it could regain its former self, if not even better. Despite plying 43 kilometers, or 1/20th of its former network, the PNR, like the little red engine that could, still manage to ferry close to 20 million passengers last year. Viewed another way, it carried 500,000 busloads of passengers a year, easing congestion in Metro Manila's parking lots, otherwise known as streets. The ridership was achieved on a sparsely distanced 2.5 trips per direction per hour. Thus, just doubling the number of trains would mean increasing the number of its passengers to 40 million annually, equivalent to 1 million bus trips. Last year's fare box income was 234 million, or an average of 11 pesos per passenger. Government subsidy was pegged at 11 pesos a passenger, an amount 1/4 the government subsidy for an MRT rider. While its rolling stock of hand-me-downs are few, PNR's main assets are its land, mainly the 800-kilometer La Union-Legazpi carriageway, plus the stations along the route, including Tutuban, now doubles as a mall. Ang PNR po ay Panginoong may lupa. Subalit ito rin ang landlord ng napakaraming informal dwellers. Maraming mga lupa nito ay napatitulohan na. The great train robbery in Philippine history did not happen on board PNR trains. It happened on the ground when the land on which the tracks are laid ended up in private hands. On paper, its land is presently valued at 40 billion, or comprising 80% of its total assets of 52 billion. Hindi pa po kasama dito ang air rights, kasi kung papatungan halimbawa ng elevated expressway ang ating mga daang bakal, ang espasyong yan ay pag-aari pa rin ng PNR. As to liabilities, PNR reported 23 billion last year. Mr. President, we are nearing traffic Armageddon. This is not something we read on the papers, but experience on the road every day. When it is faster to fly across an ocean than to travel across town, when Senator Pia can finish a marathon faster than her car can drive the same distance, then we know we are in trouble. In Metro Manila, where a majority of the country's 7 million vehicles are, a 20-kilometer-per-hour crawl is considered overspeeding. It has gone from bad to worse that one study pegged the economic and health losses to Metro Manila traffic at 137 billion. And traffic is no longer a Metro Manila disease. Average travel time on Luzon's major highways has considerably slowed down. The problem is that our roads are past their carrying capacity. When motorists bound for Bulacan or Laguna steam in traffic, which hardly moves, while hardly any train is seen on the railroad parallel to the road, then it is time to let our trains carry more load. When the queue to the MRT is as long as the distance to be traveled, then it is time to maximize the underutilized asset that is the PNR. Kung mag-e-aeroplano ka naman galing Bicol o Tuguegarao, traffic na rin sa Himpapawid. When planes spend more time circling above or idling on the runway, then it is time to develop rail as an alternative. Sa panahon din naman ng halos lahat ng highway ay may bayad na, kailangan din bigyan ng alternatibo ang mga pasahero na maglakbay sa mga daang walang toll. Halimbawa, kung ikay Batanggenyo na gusto magpalamig sa Baguio, darating ang panahon na mapipilitan kang dumaan sa 8 magkakasunod na toll roads. Star, CTEX, SLEX, Skyway, SLEX, NLEX Connector, NLEX, SCTEX at TPLEX. Wala na bang daang panglupa na mabilis pero walang bayad ng toll? Meron, at ito ang pambansang daang bakal ng Pilipinas. Kaya bago po tayo gumastos ng 135 billion para sa isang subway, pwede ba railway na muna? Mr. President, in less than 6 years, our population will grow by 10 million. By 2020, we will be 110 million. We are adding the population of one Singapore every 30 months. Also by 2020, the population of Mega Manila, which includes Bulacan, Pampanga, Batangas, Cavite, Rizal, Laguna, will increase to 31 million, or the equivalent of 6 Singapores. Ang tanong, saan titira ang mga ito? There won't be enough shoebox condos for all of them. The rest must live in bedroom towns outside NCR. But if there's a train to Pampanga, for example, one can work in Manila and go home to big house in Apalit instead of bunking in a crap pad in Avida. So this early, we should lay more tracks, add more trains that run on time, because only a mass transport system that doesn't run on 4 wheels will be able to move people around. This bill shouldn't simply extend the franchise of PNR, but should expand its services. Because any gain from renewing PNR's charter will be forfeited if it will not be rehabilitated. This bill is not a license to continue with bad service. Rather, it is a concession to improve it. This is not about putting the PNR on the same old track, but on the fast track. We must attach conditionalities and targets to the franchise extension. Otherwise, we will just be changing the expiry date of a can of milk without changing its already stale contents. Mr. President, the birth of PNR coincided with the birth of our nation. PNR was the revolution's official carrier. Delegates to the country's first parliament, the Malolos Congress, were ferried by the same trains which earlier transported soldiers to battlefields where they won our freedom. Our fathers enjoyed the comforts of PNR. We may have not, but it is not too late for our children to enjoy them. But for this to happen, like all journeys, it must begin with a simple step. And in this case, and in the case of PNRs, it is for members of the Senate from both sides of the aisle to come together as one railroad coalition. Mr. President, let us go full speed ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Recto. The Majority Leader is recognized. For the period of interpellation, may we recognize the Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Vicente Soto III.
Mr. President, at the request of the Senior Deputy Minority Leader, I move that we open the period of interpellation.
Yes. So open, and the floor, this chair earlier recognized Senator Soto.
Thank you, Mr. President. Earlier, I intended to interpellate Senate Bill 1831, but because of the elaborate sponsorship speech delivered by the distinguished lady from Las Piñas, Senator Villar, and the gentleman from Batangas, and I take off from what he said, I will withdraw my intended interpellation, and support the move to railroad the Senate bill, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Soto, and we place of record our appreciation for the bipartisan support manifested by the Senior Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Vicente Soto, manifesting the support of the minority bloc to enable the Senate to act quickly on this measure as the corporate life of PNR would expire in 6 weeks on June 14, 2014, and our session will only last under our calendar until June 13, and therefore, unless we act on this measure quickly, the corporate life will expire, and therefore that can cause the dislocation of 2,000 regular and contractual personnel, and will and the liability of the PNR in terms of loans guaranteed by the national government will become due and demandable. And therefore, it is of critical importance that the chamber act as quickly as we can in order to have this this corporate life extended. It is unfortunate that this matter is only brought to our committee and to the Senate only at this time when we are pressed for time, and therefore the chair would like to appeal to our chamber, to our fellow members, to act quickly on this proposed measure, as it does not appear to be complicated from the point of view of the chair. But having said that, yes, the chair recognizes Senator Pia Cayetano.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to echo the sentiments expressed by the Assistant Minority Floor Leader and precisely, commend the two co-sponsors for the very detailed sponsorship speeches they made, because precisely if it was just to give to resuscitate something from the dead without any plan would really be almost a waste of our time, Mr. President. But with the data and the vision that the two sponsors have presented to us, I think with the remaining time that we have, we will be able to craft something that we can be proud of before the year ends, our calendar year ends. So I look forward to working with the two co-sponsors, and I ask if they would allow me to be a co-sponsor as well, as this is really one of my dreams, to see PNR in particular and to see our country have some kind of train system that we can be proud of. So why start and build from scratch when we do have something that we can work with? So I throw my support behind this measure and look forward to improving it in the few weeks that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there are suggestions that we close the period of interpellation, but I will resist that temptation. In a country that everything is railroaded except for trains and railroads, there are a couple of members who ask to be on the list of interpellators, but we will schedule this right away on Monday, and I've spoken to the sponsors. They will be here on Monday so that we can fast-track this bill. Having said that, Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1831 under Committee Report number 22.
The Chair just hopes that we can terminate the period of interpellation on Monday, proceed on the period of amendments, and pass this bill on second reading on Monday, so that we can pass it on third reading not later than the 17th of June of May, to enable us to sit in bicameral conference if there are differences in our versions. Under this timetable, we barely have a month before the corporate life expires, and therefore I would appeal to our members, to our co-senators, to act with dispatch on this proposed measure. The Chair will now suspend, upon motion of the Majority Leader, consideration of Senate Bill number 1831 under Committee Report number 22.
Mr. President, I move that we consider the second reference of business, additional reference of business.
The Secretary will, the consideration of the second additional reference of business is in order. The Secretary will read into the record.
Second additional reference of business, Committee Report. Committee Report number 23, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Agriculture and Food, Environment and Natural Resources, and Finance on Senate number 2207, with Senators Cynthia A. Villar, Ligarda, Ramon Bong Revilla Jr., Lapid, Ejercito Estrada, Defensor Santiago, Cayetano, A.P., and Soto III, as authors thereof, entitled an act amending some provisions of Republic Act number 8550, otherwise known as the Philippine Fisheries Code of 1998, and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 138, 536, 961, 1271, 1374, and 2115, and PS Resolution number 158, sponsor Senator Cynthia Villar.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2207 under Committee Report number 23 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2207 under Committee Report number 23.
Under. Any objection? Hearing none, carried.
I move that the Secretary read the title of the measure, Mr. President.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act amending some provisions of Republic Act number 8550, otherwise known as the Philippine Fisheries Code of 1998, and for other purposes.
Because it's either we make it 25, delete this, or we make it 15. Because we will renew it. This is a
I move that we recognize Senator Villar to sponsor the said measure.
Senator Villar is recognized to sponsor Senate Bill number 2207 under Committee Report number 23. Senator Villar.
Mr. President, my fellow senators, I stand here today to sponsor Senate Bill 2207, or an act amending some provisions of Republic Act number 8550, otherwise known as the Philippine Fisheries Code of 1998, and for other purposes. RA 550, or the Fisheries Code, was passed in February 9, 1998. It governs the affairs of the fisheries sector. The main purpose of the law is to address the depleting coastal resources of the country by providing management options of the country's resources and recognizing the important roles of all direct users. It also ensures the attainment of the following objectives of the fishery sector: conservation, protection, and sustained management of the country's fishery and aquatic resources, poverty alleviation, and the provision of supplementary livelihood among fishers folks, improvement of productivity of aquaculture within ecological limits, optional utilization of offshore and deep sea resources, and upgrading of the post-harvest technology. Any discussion about the fisheries sector is important because the Philippines is an important producer of fish in the world, ranking 6th in fish production. The 4.97 million metric tons production of fish, crustacean, mollusks, and aquatic plants, including seaweeds, accounts for 3.12% of the total world catch of 159.1 million metric tons, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization. The Philippines is also ranked 9th in aquaculture production of fish, crustaceans, and mollusks. We contribute 1.4% to the total global aquaculture production of 52.55 million metric tons. The country's aquaculture production amounts to over $1.58 billion. We are also among the top 3 largest producers of aquatic plants, including seaweeds, with production of a total of 1.67 million metric tons, or about 10.6% of the total world production of 15.78 million metric tons, based on Food and Agricultural Organization. Fisheries, lumped with agriculture, hunting, and forestry sectors, contribute significantly to the country's gross domestic product. In addition, the fishing industry share to gross value added in agriculture, hunting, forestry, and fishing sector at current and constant prices are 199.46 billion and 130.98 billion respectively, the largest share next to agricultural crops. Agriculture posted a 1.1% growth in 2013. The livestock, poultry, and fishery subsectors contributed to the improved performance of the sector in 2013. At current prices, gross output in agriculture was valued at 1.5 trillion. The fisheries subsector contributed 7.96% to the total agricultural output. The fisheries sectors also provide direct and indirect employment to over 1 million people, or about 12% of the agriculture, fishery, and forestry sector of the labor force, which is about 11 million. Bottom line is that we cannot overemphasize the fact that our country is teeming in fisheries resources. The Philippines is an archipelago, so that is really no surprise. In fact, the Philippines is qualified as among the archipelagic states under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. An archipelagic state is conceived as one whose component islands and other natural features form an intrinsic geographical, economic, and political entity, and historically have and may have been regarded as such. This archipelagic doctrine is also enshrined in Article 2 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution that reads, "The national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago, with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all the other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, consisting of its territorial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial seas, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and the other submarine areas. The waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimensions, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. As such, we should observe the strict implementation and enforcement of laws and policies to better safeguard areas within our sovereignty and jurisdiction. We have thus extensively reviewed provisions that will support and strengthen that. There is no question also that we need to maintain a good balance between the requirements for increased production to contribute to food security against the need to conserve and protect our resources for long-term sustainability. We need to observe international treaty obligations on food safety to curb illegal, unreported, unauthorized, and unregulated fishing, and to comply with conservation and management measures. There is no question that we need a strong fisheries law, including a comprehensive national plan of action to, among others, manage fishing capacity as well as the implementation of the International Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. We already have in place a national plan of action on illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, or IUUF, which is in line with the International Plan of Action to prevent, deter, and eliminate IUUF. On December 6, 2013, President Aquino signed Executive Order 154, adopting the Philippine National Plan of Action and creating the Philippine Committee on Illegal, Unregulated, Unreported Fishing to oversee its implementation. The Philippine National Plan of Action on IUUF has 9 sections describing illegal fishing activities in the country, as well as actions to curb IUUF, which include measures on coastal state, flag state, and port state. Revision of the Fisheries Code to sanction unreported and unregulated fishing and to modify penalties for a more deterrent effects, and ratifying the fish tax agreement is part of the coastal state measures. Mr. President and esteemed colleagues, we also need to address important issues related to the fisheries sector that also have an impact socially, politically, and environmentally on our citizens and country. Moreover, we also need to amend provisions to comply with our commitments to international treaties, conventions, or agreements. Allow me now, Mr. President and esteemed colleagues, to present some of the salient points of our Senate bill entitled An Act Amending Some Provisions of Republic Act Number 8550, otherwise known as the Philippine Fisheries Code of 1998, and for other purposes. These are, first, revision of paragraph C of the Declaration of Policy to reflect the need for the country to pursue and achieve its international commitments. Number 2, revision of paragraph F of the Declaration of Policy to ensure that management of fishery and aquatic resources is also anchored on ecosystem-based approach. And number 3, the chapter. We only touched the chapter on prohibitions and penalties. We deleted the existing chapter and replaced it with a new chapter, Chapter 6, for clarity and more readability given the numerous amendments of the said chapter. Chapter 6 is comprised of 3 parts that enumerates prohibitions. So we made amendments on prohibitions. The second part is administrative fines and penalties the department and BIFAR can impose on violators. We make amendments on that because we have to conform with the international standard. And number 3, the criminal fines and penalties that a court can impose, we made no amendments on that. We retained that. The substitute bill amending provisions of the Philippine Fisheries Code of 1998 aims to level the fishing legislation at par with other countries, especially with regard to conservation measures regarding threatened aquatic species, straddling and highly migratory species, and other marine resources. The Philippines has acceded to several treaties and has agreed to comply with its international commitment with Joint Regional Fisheries Management Organization. As part of our commitment, it is imperative upon us to revise, amend our law on fisheries, specifically the Philippine Fisheries Code of 1998 and the regulations of the Department of Agriculture and the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. At this point, Mr. President and esteemed colleague, I seek the urgent passage of this bill. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Villar, the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2207 under Committee Report number 23.
Consideration of Senate Bill number 2207 under Committee Report number 23 suspended.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Wala pa na. Tita, hindi sumagot si Chief. Mr. President.
The session is resumed. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, May 7, 2014.
Session adjourned until Wednesday, May 7 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.